Okay, let's begin. So thank you, everyone. It's great to have you all here. My name is Andrew Wong. I'm the head of Japan Marketing, Customer Enablement here at Liquid. I'll be using English for this presentation, for speaking, but we do have real-time translation service. It's your device if you require it. We're extremely grateful that each of you are taking the time to really join us today. You know, we got an amazing group of really world-renowned industry leaders gathered here in our wonderful office. Hope you guys are all comfortable. It's really incredible, and on behalf of Liquid, we're incredibly honored and humbled that you are taking time to come here today. So thank you very much. Today we're going to be having a candid and educational conversation about creating the future of digital asset security. You know, we're also going to be learning about how regulations are shaping the digital asset and blockchain space, and really understanding the implications of those regulations on our industry and for each of you. We're also here to discuss the latest in security implementations of digital assets from Professor Yehuda Lindell, who flew here, CEO and co-founder of Unbound Tech, who flew here all the way from Israel to join us today. Unbound Tech is a world leader in protecting cryptographic keys, and it's adopted by global Fortune 500 companies. And so without further ado, it's my great pleasure to welcome to the stage here Professor Yehuda Lindell, who will be giving his presentation. Please, let's have the questions at the end, and we're very happy to have you here, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I would like to begin by thanking Liquid for organizing this event, and for, I guess most of all, being fantastic partners and collaborators. We have a really great relationship, and we're very appreciative. I'm going to talk about speed, security and compliance in blockchain and cryptocurrencies, but more on the technological side of things. When we look at the cryptocurrency space, there are a number of unique security issues that arise that are very different from what we're used to from in other spaces. To start with, we're talking about a digital asset, not a physical asset. So the key is the asset. If you lose the cryptographic key, then obviously you've lost all of your funds. We're not protecting something physical, we are indeed protecting something digital, and that means that we need a digital solution to that. That one's obvious. What may be less obvious is that the classical mechanisms that we have for protecting digital material are actually very different to this space. Let's think about encryption. In encryption, we may have a database of 10 million encrypted credit cards, and what we want to do is protect or prevent someone from stealing the encrypted database together with the decryption key. Because if I can do that, then I just take it all home and just decrypt one by one, and I can get all of the credit cards. So I want to prevent the key from being stolen. That's my primary aim. If someone manages to use the key and decrypt a few credit cards, even 1,000 or 2,000, out of 10 million, I'm not too worried about that. But in the cryptocurrency world, it's a completely different problem. If I have $10 million that are in an account protected by a single key, I don't need to steal the key. I just need to use the key once. One single fraudulent transaction, and I have all of the money. So we don't need to protect the key from being stolen. That's obvious. If you could steal the key, then you can obviously use it. But I need to prevent someone from fraudulently using the key and not just stealing it. And that actually is a completely different threat and requires completely different solutions. The third thing that I want to say, which is unique about this space, is that by its entire design, blockchain-based cryptocurrencies are irreversible. You can't reverse a transaction once it's happened. So if someone has managed to use that key once for one fraudulent transaction and transfer all of my money, even if I detect it 1 second later, it's too late, I can't get the money back. Again, that makes it unique and very different from the traditional financial world. When we look at this scenario, that we look in this space, there are a number of different scenarios that we want to consider and provide solutions for. And ideally, we'd like to have one platform that can actually answer many different needs. Because as organizations grow, they're going to be providing different solutions to their customers. The first is a custody type solution. Here, typically, we're storing large amounts of funds as investments, perhaps, and there's typically pretty low turnover because we're investing those funds. We're not going to be moving around all the time. Sometimes we will, but usually not. And because of that, the transactions can be rather complex. We may want to mirror the physical custody world in terms of processes and procedures, but we do need to still have fast transaction time in the case of a disaster. If the market is crashing or just a customer needs their money very quickly for whatever reason, we need to be able to provide good service in those cases as well. Exchanges are actually very different because when you look at the world of exchanges, they're carrying out transactions all the time, and fast transactions is a matter of daily business. And the solution, whatever solution is provided, needs to be able to suit itself to that, and also to be able to provide protection for different wallet sizes. Because the typical way of working in these types of organizations is you have small, medium, and large vaults or wallets. The larger vaults obviously are going to be more protected in order to, and it may be harder to transfer money out of them, but that's the way we can get fast transaction time by having smaller wallets with an easier process for transferring money and larger wallets with a harder process. And finally, there are end user wallets. We hope to see people using cryptocurrencies more and more as time goes on. For that to happen, we'll also need to provide solutions for them. Whatever I'll present today will also be relevant for that, although I'll be focusing more on what you need in the custody and exchange type setting. What are our basic requirements? The first is high security. That's obvious, but again, I want to stress that when I say high security, I don't mean prevent someone from stealing the key. I mean prevent someone from fraudulently using any key. That's a much bigger challenge and one that has to be addressed. However, when we're building a solution, a security solution has to be a solution that supports the business needs. It's not just a matter of providing security, but it's one that has to enable business to take place. Otherwise, we get stuck in a situation where we have a great technology, but it's not applicable because it doesn't support innovative business. So now the things that we need first is, of course, backup and disaster recovery. We've all heard stories of people losing their keys. And once you lose keys in a cryptocurrency setting, not only have you lost the money, the entire world has lost that money. It's in limbo. Nobody can get access to it. And we obviously don't want that to happen to us as individuals. And it's a huge disaster if it happens in exchanges or custody settings. And there are stories of people maybe disappearing, or maybe not, with the key, maybe without the key. We don't want anything like that to be possible. Fast transaction speed is absolutely crucial. Waiting 12 hours, 24 hours, 48 hours, even 5 hours for transactions can be very, very problematic. It's bad customer experience, and it's also a problem when you're using the exchange to trade and you want to be able to move things around based on what's happening in the market. You don't want to be very, very slow to respond. It's also true, again, in custody and in other applications like trading. Flexibility is crucial and one that sometimes is ignored. We need a solution that will support different coins, but what's really important is we need a solution that we know will be flexible enough to support the future. Because there's only one thing I know about cryptocurrencies, and that is that I don't know what's going to be happening a year from now. It's an incredibly fast-changing field. There's a lot of volatility, a lot of movement. Will we be still with a proof of work in 2 years from now? Or will everything have moved to proof of stake? Maybe there'll be a different consensus mechanism. We have so-called permission blockchains or Byzantine agreement for us old cryptographers who were around in the 80s. I was around in the 90s, but still. Byzantine agreement was from the 80s. So we need something which is going to support the future, isn't dependent on a very, very specific coin, and is flexible and agile for that. And we also need something that enables us to fine-tune the security versus usability trade-off, solve hopefully a lot of that trade-off, but indeed support more complex transactions versus simpler transactions depending on the speed and the risk that we allocate to the transactions themselves. And Seth will talk in his presentation about some things that they've done in order to exactly support those issues. So what are the solutions out there? This is a nomination problem, I apologize. Firstly, there are cold wallets or disconnected hardware. The main problem with these is they're just not flexible, and they have very poor usability. As soon as I have a cold wallet sitting in a vault that maybe requires 2 or 3 people to simultaneously come, give their credentials in order to open the door, then go in and physically prepare all the transactions manually. That takes a long time. Not only does it give poor customer experience, something that organizations realize is also a big problem for their employees, because that means that they're going to need to be available at nighttime, on the weekends. Employees don't want to be forced to have to do that on a regular basis. But that's the reality of a cold wallet type situation. We also have this conception that if it's cold, it must be very secure. But I just want to stress that it's not that clear. Of course, the risks can be mitigated, but in a cold wallet type setting, at the end, there is the key sitting in a device in a room that people have access to. That is a risk. That's number one. Number two, if you're doing something like connecting a USB stick, well, how do you know that USB stick hasn't been corrupted, hasn't got malware on it? Of course, you do a lot to try and prevent that, but I just want to stress that this is not a perfect solution in any way, shape, or form. The second family of solutions is to use HSM's hardware security modules. They provide very strong physical security. They prevent the key from being stolen. And I want to stress that is the exact point of HSMs. They were designed to prevent keys from being stolen. But as I explained earlier, that is not the threat model, the primary threat model here. The primary threat model here is keys being fraudulently used. If the HSM is connected to the network, it's no different from any other computer connected to the network, and it's vulnerable to someone accessing that HSM and carrying out the operation. Even if they don't have access to the key, they can't steal the key and look at the bits. They can use the key, and for us, that's good enough. We don't need to do anything else. Maybe not for us, for the attackers. Furthermore, if it's not connected to the network, then it's a cold solution with all the pain and usability issues around a cold wallet type solution. It has even more drawbacks because it's an inherently inflexible type of solution. It doesn't support many standards. It's very slow to be updated. I'd argue it's a great solution for problems that were around in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s in enterprise security. I don't even think it's a great solution for enterprise security problems today. I just think it's the wrong solution in the cryptocurrency space. Again, having an HSM in a cold room in a vault that's physically protected and is disconnected from the network. I'm not saying that from a security perspective that's necessarily bad. It certainly doesn't support business needs. Multi-sig is a technology that's supported on some ledgers. For example, it's native in Bitcoin. It enables you to define a number of signatories. Say 3, for example, and any 2 out of 3 have to provide a signature. This mirrors things that we're used to in the banking world. It has a lot of advantages. We no longer have this single point of failure of one key. However, it's not supported by all ledgers. You can program it on Ethereum, but then you're using smart contracts that can themselves have bugs, and we've seen that happen in the past. Furthermore, there are other coins that don't support multi-sig. And in a year or 2 years from now, what are the coins that are going to be popular? Will they not support multi-sig? It's not, we want something that's ledger agnostic. Furthermore, it doesn't support other very important features like refresh. Refresh means that, I'll tell you the problem. Multi-sig, let's go one from refresh. In multi-sig, if I have 3 people and I need 2 out of those 3 to sign, I can break into one. Even if it takes me 3 months later to break into the other, I've got both keys that I can then carry out and compute the signature and transfer the funds. What I would like is to have a situation where the attacker has to simultaneously breach a quorum of users in order to carry out the operation. That's much, much harder to do. A multi-sig does not support that. Furthermore, it doesn't support things like employee replacement. If someone leaves, then what happens to their key? If they had access to their key, now a new employee will get that key. Maybe you can do that, but the old employee may have already stolen the key, and now you have to replace it. The only way to replace it is to transfer funds. Transferring funds is impossible for an organization to do every time an employee comes or goes. What if I want to change the quorum size? Instead of 2 out of 3, I want it to be 2 out of 4, or maybe 3 out of 5. None of that is supported in multi-sig without transferring all of the funds. That makes it problematic. Finally, there is SGX. People are talking about using a secure enclave. It's in all Intel chips. It allows you to run software in a secure environment. Everything is encrypted outside of the enclave. Nothing can be extracted. It sounds fantastic. We only wish that it actually fulfilled its promise. SGX is badly broken. It leaks secrets in a very, very bad way. It's not difficult at all to extract because there's no isolation. Even the ECDSA key that is used as part of Intel's attestation process, which means it's the most protected key inside the enclave, has been stolen from enclaves using side channel attacks, software side channel attacks. It just doesn't work, it's just not secure. It's a good secondary security measure, but it's certainly not good enough to protect cryptocurrencies. So I want to present a new alternative, which isn't that new, but it's the alternative that I want to advocate, is secure multi-party computation. I do want to stress that it doesn't have to contradict any of the previous measures. You can combine secure multi-party computation with cold wallets, with multi-sig, with other things if you desire. In many cases it's not necessary, but it's a matter of threat model and each company, each organization is deciding for themselves what their risk and threat model is. So what is MPC? That's the acronym. MPC is a subfield of cryptography. It's been researched since the 80s, since the mid to late 80s. It enables parties to compute on data without ever revealing it. That's the basic idea. There have been thousands of research papers around MPC. It's a well understood area of science. And it was purely theoretical until quite recently. I started studying it in 1998 at the beginning of my PhD. I spent a good decade doing pure theory, almost pure math. Then we started working on making it more efficient, and now it's something which is in commercial products and is a very powerful solution. And what's interesting about MPC is that its security guarantees are mathematically proven. So within the threat model I explained, which is essentially you don't corrupt everyone at the same time, we can mathematically prove that it's impossible to steal or to use the key. It's also transparent in the sense that it's software, it can be it's peer reviewed, it can be audited, and that's a very big difference from the traditional opaque HSM hardware type world. So just as a toy example for MPC, think of 3 cryptographers going to lunch. They want the cryptographer who earns the most to pay for lunch, but they don't want to tell each other how much they earn because they're very privacy conscious. They also earn very, very little if you look at their salaries, so they don't want to tell each other they're too embarrassed at how low their salaries are after doing their PhD for so many years. So here they do the computation, and it turns out that Alice pays for lunch because she's the highest earning cryptographer, but nobody knows what Alice earns and nothing is revealed. And that's what we want from an MPC protocol. In the context of cryptocurrency protection, we use MPC to do something called threshold signing. Threshold signing is an idea where a single key for signing is shared amongst a number of parties so that no subset of the parties can carry out the transaction. And this sharing of the keys happens from key generation, and the key remains separate through its entire life cycle, even during signing. So the key material is never exposed, never in any single place, and therefore cannot be stolen. And what it enabled us to do is to define a quorum. For example, here we could define a quorum of five entities. say, 2 people holding mobile phones and 2 servers and 1 person with a laptop. And each of those 5 people have to agree and approve the transaction. And this approval is not authenticating to a server and giving a password, because that can be bypassed by going to the server itself. Rather, each of the entities actually holds cryptographic key material, and we have a mathematical proof of security that if you only corrupt a subset, you cannot do anything whatsoever. And that's what's really important. You would have to breach an entire quorum in order to do anything at all. And that's the security guarantee that MPC gives you. MPC is also a very general technology, which means that it can support all of the standard signing algorithms that are used. So today it's ECDSA, EDSA, Schnorr, but it also supports RSA, all the standard crypto operations. It supports symmetric. You can do anything in MPC, and we can do it efficiently today. We can also define a flexible quorum. It's not share the key amongst 5 parties and have all 5 participate. We could define 2 sets in 2 different business units and say we need 3 out of 5 people in one business unit and 2 out of 4 in the other business unit, and unless a full quorum approves, it's impossible to carry out the operation. And we can define these completely flexibly, and this is where we want to connect the cryptography to the business needs. Being able to define different quorum sizes, different numbers of sets, enables us to set up policies that are very simple for small transactions and are very complex for more risky and larger transactions. We can also have some of those approvers be automatic bots and some of them be humans, and some of them even be cold depending on the business needs. So here's a very complex example. Let's say we have custody for very, very large amounts of funds. We may have a trustee involved, we may have the customer involved, and the service provider, the custodian themselves. And then we can require that 1 out of the 2 people of the customer and 1 of the 2 people, the trustee, have to approve the transaction. And at the service provider, we have 2 supervisors, and 1 out of those 2 also have to approve. And we have 3 automatic bots that carry out compliance and a risk policy checking. So there's an AML, a compliance, and anti-fraud bot that will verify that the transaction is approved before it can take place. And the only way for an attacker to bypass this is to corrupt a complete quorum simultaneously at one time, and that's something which is very, very difficult. In fact, almost impossible, but it's never impossible because there's no perfect security. That's life. But it's also true in the physical world. What are the important features here? First is the integrated policy enforcement. The policies that are provided are not are also signed by a quorum. There can be a separate administration quorum that will define those, and they're validated at every single step. So you can't bypass it because it's validated by every single entity who's holding cryptographic key material. It achieves fast transaction time because it's in software. So the bots are immediate, that's instantaneous, and the humans just need to get the notification and verify that, that they accept. Of course, the MPC protocol will take some milliseconds to compute, but we can be talking tens to hundreds of milliseconds. That's nothing in this context. The authorization by the human it can also be asynchronous. They don't have to go online at the same time. They get notification. As soon as a quorum is approved, it goes through. It supports secure backup. Actually, it's provably secure backup with zero-knowledge proofs that you know for sure you have a valid backup. That's very important. It supports administration. You can add and remove parties. You can revoke keys, key shares. The key stays the same, but you revoke the share. You can allocate new shares if you want to add new employees. All of that is supported by the solution. Again, it's a cryptographic solution, a technical solution, but one that supports business needs for organizations that need to run such a business. And finally, in some cases, regulators require to have a true offline part of the solution. You don't need to implement a completely different solution. You can have one or even more of the parties in the MPC actually be true cold or offline parts. And what's interesting about that is that in addition to having now a true offline disconnected from the network piece, if that's needed, that is still not a single point of failure, because even if that's in the vault, someone goes in and connects for that transaction, they are not able to carry out the full transaction themselves. So you still have a quorum elsewhere, so it's cold improved in terms of the security, and also therefore you can improve the usability of it. You don't need to have 3 people go, you can maybe have 1, but that's up to each organization to decide based on their threat analysis. As I mentioned, you can define risk policies, so you can define different quorum sizes or what transactions are allowed depending on the time of day, the size of the transaction, the day of the week, but you can have a whitelist, and you can use a quorum of administrators to manage those policies as well. It also is aligned with compliance and regulatory requirements. You can incorporate different bots. You can have KYC or AML verification. You have segregation of duties between the definition of the policy and the approvers themselves. And all of this is audited at more than one place because you need multiple parties to participate. Each operation is audited at all of the participants, and therefore you have essentially, by decentralization and by distribution, a tamper-proof audit as well, which is very important. As I mentioned, you have full flexibility to fund humans, bots, or even something offline. A human, for example, would authenticate on their phone. That would unlock their ability to use the MPC protocol. Then they approve it, but it's a cryptographic operation happening underneath, not just merely sending a yes, I agree answer. It's a full platform, as I mentioned, so it supports all of these different elements. A robust cryptographic engine that's been in production for many years in the enterprise security world, and now is being deployed in the cryptocurrency space. Liquid is, of course, using, as are numerous other customers, and it can support any asset, flexible policies, and multiple participants. So in summary, threshold signing and MPC provides a new direction. It's well-founded and established technology based on deep science that really is suited very much to the cryptocurrency space. It solves the primary problem of fraudulent key usage because by having these quorums, you actually need to breach multiple entities at the same time in order to carry out an operation. And that's very, very different from any other solution that's out there. It's suitable for the entire spectrum of wallets, exchanges, and custodians, and has everything that I mentioned. It's ledger agnostic, it supports any device and platform, and yeah, that's basically everything that it does, which I think is very suitable for what we need here. So thank you very much. Any questions?
Actually, let's save the questions for after Seth finishes.
Okay.
Yes. I just want to make sure we're cognizant of time. Yeah. We can have more questions than there.
Try to remember your questions.
You're on. Yeah, sure. So, thanks everyone for coming out tonight, braving the coronavirus. I can assure you you're safe here. Our Chief Information Security Officer tells us we have filtered air here. For myself, I'm a little bit nervous. Please bear with me. Following Professor Lindell on the topic about digital asset security is sort of like following J-Lo after a halftime performance at the Super Bowl. Hold on 1 second. There we go. Right, Seth, you have the floor. Okay, great, thanks. We also have more simultaneous translation devices if you desire it over there. Help yourself. Okay. Thanks again, everyone, for coming. So,
Okay, so my name is Seth Melamed. Just a little bit about me. I'm the CEO of the Liquid Group. I worked in banking for about 20 years, previous 11 years working at Goldman Sachs, focused mostly in operations, payments, treasury, cash management. I've been here at Liquid for 2.5 years, and I wouldn't say I'm an expert like Professor Lindell, but I spent a lot of time thinking about and working on how we manage cryptographic assets here at Liquid. Little bio about me: I love edamame, Texas Hold'em, my 2 daughters. So a little bit about Liquid. Who don't know us, I assume everyone here does. So we were founded in 2014. We're a founder-led company. We have our offices here in Tokyo as well as in Saigon. We have about 700,000 users globally, and our daily trading volume these days is about 150 million. Really depends on the volatility. A little bit about our investors. And so, what brought us here tonight? So I was thinking a lot about what had happened in the past couple of years since I've come to Japan and worked in the industry. And I think there's a lot of room for improvement in the industry. And there was even a lot of improvement at Liquid. And I would say around 2018, we spent a lot of time thinking about how we can improve our exchange, how can we improve the user experience. And one of the questions we were grasping with is, what is the trade-off between speed and security? And we spent a lot of time thinking about different models, the way we can serve our customers in the way we wanted to. And we found with this technology that we've adopted and really embraced here at Liquid, that we've been able to eliminate the compromise between security and speed. So a little background, which should be helpful, right? So as you all know, that Bitcoin has been around since the white paper in 2009. Bitcoin has really been out there since 2010. And the first real hack actually came here in Japan in 2014. I think it was February, March 2014 with our friends at Mt. Gox. And at the time, it was slightly under $500 million at the time. If the Bitcoin price was at the same value today, it would be multiples of that. And then you can see over time that the amount of hacks that have happened in exchanges globally has increased. I think if we were to fast forward till the end of 2020, the total hack might be closer to $2 billion. So $2 billion may not sound like a lot of money, but it's also important to think about the context that the total market cap of cryptographic assets today, digital assets, is probably about 230 to 240 billion. So if 2 billion of that's been hacked, that's slightly less than 1% of all assets out there. If we were to apply the same sort of ratio to fiat money supply, M3 money supply is about $15 trillion. So if we were to apply the same ratio, it would be, I don't know, something closer to $200 billion of assets that have been stolen. So it's a big problem. Here's sort of the timeline, Mt. Gox, 2014. A big event here in Japan, CoinCheck. Some history of some hacks. Last year, finance was the last big one around July of 2019. So I wanted to kind of take a journey through the history of Liquid, and please bear with me. So as I said, we started off in 2014. We actually started off with 4 employees in a 1-bedroom apartment in District 2 in Saigon. And at that time, we kept our private key on a little USB drive, and it's actually still here with us. And at that time, we were actually processing 2 withdrawals per week. Okay, that's where we were at. And we actually had 1 person with 1 USB with the private key. Probably not the best security model. We evolved in 2016. We created a dedicated signing device, basically built onto a laptop, where at least the private key was password protected. And we actually got our speed up to 1 batch of withdrawals processed per day, as long as it's a weekday, no weekends or holidays. And into 2017 and 18, we then started implementing multi-sig, where we were taking, in the protocols that support multi-sig, we were taking one private key, having it on an HSM device based here in Tokyo, another private key based in Vietnam, and we're able to have multiple parties part of the signing process. And at our peak, when we were really working well as a team, we got up to 3 withdrawals per day, again on weekdays. And then finally, we'll get into a little bit this more later on. In 2019, we really started implementing NPC, and it's a transformative change for our business, for our customers, where we started getting up to withdrawals of 300 withdrawals per day, and that's across multiple different types of assets. So a big factor was, our coming across Unbound, and a lot of that was triggered to a trip I had taken to Israel, a business trip in 2018, and started to learn about Professor Lindell, his work around NPC, and kind of what we discovered is that this technology of NPC, while it's really novel in the context of cryptocurrency, it's actually battle-tested technology that's been around at the enterprise level, protecting data in data centers. It's been used by government agencies for a number of years, and we saw in NPC an ability for us to kind of leapfrog where we were with how we could manage cryptographic assets. So looking into 2019, like I said, we did a lot of our study in 2018, started our implementation in 2019. So in January 2019, we were processing, the average time to do a withdrawal was, on average, say about 11 hours in early January. And then over the course of the year, as we completed our implementation, we got that number down. We took a measurement the first week of January, and what we found was that 90% of our withdrawals from our clients was processed in less than 5 minutes, and the medium latency for withdrawal requests was about 3 minutes. So there were some outliers that pushed up the overall average, but a lot of that was due to intentional security controls that we had put in place to check for larger size withdrawals. So I want to go back to sort of the journey that we began back in 2018, thinking about how we can improve our business. And we looked at a lot of different options out there, right? So we looked at the big vendors like BitGo and Ledger. We looked at HSM solutions. We looked at developing something our own. And at the end of the day, what really struck me was thinking about blockchain. Blockchain is in itself a decentralized means of transference of value, where there's no intermediaries, where you don't have to rely on a single point, that there's the ability to bring in lots of different entities to ensure that transactions are valid. And so when we're thinking about managing of cryptographic assets, we wanted a solution, a security protocol that's befitting of a new asset class in the form of blockchain assets. I think Professor Lindell did a great job of explaining some of the differences between hardware, HSMs, and NPC technology, but I just thought I would try to simplify it and distill it into pictures in a form that I can better understand. So, on the left-hand side, you'll see typically how private keys, which in blockchain world, the private key is really what governs the movement of value across the blockchain. And traditionally, those private keys would be stored on hardware devices, right? It could be a Trezor, it could be a server in a data center. In some cases, it could be on a computer that's locked in a vault, surrounded by men with guns and German shepherds. But the point here to really draw out is that the private key lives on one single endpoint. And if you have the device, you have the key. And if you don't have access to the device, you don't have the key. But that can also be problematic from our experience in that, customers, blockchain is an anytime, anywhere type of technology. And clients of our exchange expect that sort of service level. So if we move over to the right side, it's the NPC model sort of in pictures, where the key doesn't live in any single endpoint. it's distributed across, you know, any number of endpoints. And those endpoints could indeed be hardware devices, but the endpoints could also be a cloud service provider. I'm not giving away any trade secrets. I hope my Chief Information Security Officer is here, but for instance, we keep some of our key shares on different cloud services providers like Google, AWS, and this is a distributed model that gives us a lot of flexibility to serve our customers in a secure and fast manner. So I'll just try to break down some of the differences. So we looked at some of the state-of-the-art of custody solutions out there today, and they'll vary depending on the service provider, but typically when you have your private key on a physical device, it requires coordination of employees to come together to actually do the signing. And that can often take 2 to 36 hours, right? In an NPC model, we believe what's really important is that the customers themselves are part of the signing process. The customers themselves don't actually have the key, or they don't have the entirety of the key, but they have the ability to actually make the action with a key share, right? And so you can cut down on the amount of time it takes to sign a transaction, literally going from hours to minutes or even seconds. Another key point is about the key. So I have here a Trezor. I don't know how many people, how close people are in the industry, what's going on, but actually a few days ago there was an article that some security researchers found out that they could actually extract the key material from this Trezor in about 15 minutes with hardware equipment that could be purchased for about $75. And once someone has access to the key, there's really no limit to what they can do, right? One of the important parts about the flexibility of an NPC distributed model is that there is no single endpoint where that key actually lives. And no single endpoint, even if I did have a share, this share, even if you were to get access to a partial version of the key, you wouldn't have enough information to use it in any illicit manner. There were some other factors that we looked at. You know, we had to build a business and a solution that was scalable. And when we really operated under the thesis that it's something we need for 10 years out, and that we would need a framework for our business to be able to grow and offer new products and services that are really linked to the blockchain. And on that basis, we thought a software-based solution that would allow for flexibility, as Professor Lindell quite rightly said, you know, no one really knows which ledger protocol or which consensus protocol is going to succeed in the future. And what's important is that your framework for managing these types of assets can grow and adopt very quickly. And we thought that a software-based solution that's, you know, like I said, it's battle-tested. NPC has been out there used by organizations for many years, but it's also peer-reviewed and can be updated based on the new requirements of new protocols that develop. Would be much more flexible than hardware-based solutions where you would need to take the hardware in for repair, to put it in, give it a firmware update, and would have much higher operating costs to manage. So I talked a little bit about the flexibility and the security and the speed, but I think it's important to draw an actual live example of how we see this sort of technology, distributed multi-party computing, working in practice. So, you know, I think a lot of us are here because we're sort of at the cusp of institutional investment coming into blockchain and digital asset management. And so someone who I quite admire, Ray Dalio from Bridgewater, you know, he speaks quite a bit about Bitcoin. And so imagine Bridgewater wanted to get involved in cryptocurrency markets. And so Bridgewater may not be experts in cryptography, but they are concerned about hacks, and they're looking for a licensed custodian with both high security, but also importantly, high service levels that allows them to move their funds quickly in the event that there's a market disruption and they need to move funds from one place to another to take advantage of a trading opportunity. So if we look at the traditional custodial model, this would be very difficult to do. Even in the best case scenario, it would take several hours to move those assets. They're sort of subject to the service levels of the custodian. Bridgewater, the client themselves, are not actually participants of the management of the cryptographic assets. Everything is sort of opaque and left to the custodian to manage on their behalf. But in an MPC model, the client themselves will have control of their assets. They can actually be member of what Professor Lindell referred to as the quorum, meaning they themselves will have a key share, and they can effect a transaction and move those assets. So what are some of the needs of the fund manager of tomorrow? I want my own people to have sole custody of my funds. So there's some asset managers will need this. I want a trusted third party to be part of my custody quorum. So a larger asset manager who has assets over $100 million, at least in the United States, they have a fiduciary responsibility to have a third party to be part of the custody of their assets. I want stricter signing requirements for bigger withdrawals. So, if we refer here to the key on the Trezor doesn't know the size of the transaction and can't really make judgments about the size and whether it's going to be signed or not. When you have access to the device and you have access to the key, whether the movement is half of a Bitcoin or 500 Bitcoin, it will sign that transaction. With an MPC, and we'll show a live example, we can create policies around the signing of a transaction based on the value of the transaction itself. And then for even really large withdrawals, I'll want, or movements, I'll want even more requirements about who needs to be part of the quorum that signs the transaction. So here, in the first case, essentially, Bridgewater has decided on a self-custody model, where it's maybe Mr. Dalio himself, his head trader, his operations, and his operations officer. And what's important to note is that the flexibility of MPC, where the keys are held on different endpoints, or I should say, I want to be clear, the key shares are held on different endpoints. And one of the endpoints could actually be an offline HSM device itself, right? So in this case, it's a full self-custody of their funds. But now they've modified their quorum, and they actually want a third party, a trusted third party, a custodian, an escrow agent, and they want that third party to be part of the quorum. So Bridgewater has replaced their 3 employees with 1 employee, Professor Lindell, a global custodian, and Liquid, for example. So here's another example. So in this case, the client has preemptively set up different thresholds based on the risk policies that they want to govern their organization. So if they're trying to move assets that are, say, $100,000 or less, they require 2 out of 4 internal employees to approve the transaction. Right? But if the movement is worth more than $100,000, they still need 2 out of 4 from their employee group, but they'll also need 1 out of 2 from a third-party group. So when a real transaction comes in and only 1 out of the 4 Bridgewater employees signs the transaction, the withdrawal is not actioned, even though we have 2 people from the other group that have approved it. The transaction will not get signed, it will not be broadcast on the blockchain, and nothing has happened. Funds are safe. But in the second scenario, we've had 2 people from the employee group approve and 1 person from the third party group to sign. The transaction is now signed, it's broadcast on the blockchain. What's important to understand here is that this whole process can literally be done in minutes. We've created a very complex risk management policy that's enforced cryptographically, and we've cut down the amount of time it takes for these actors to interact and enforce these policies, like I said, from hours into minutes. And so I've given one example, but actually the MPC gives us a framework to build on further iterations of risk policies that fits the client's needs. So you can set up risk policies with any number of signings, but at the end of the day, you have to have at least this Mr. Ray Dalio has a veto power. And without his key share and participation, it doesn't matter, the transaction will not be signed. You can base the signing based on location. As we showed, create different groups. It could be employees, custodians, escrow agents. You can vary your risk policies based on the currency, time of day, velocity controls. And just a little bit about what we did at Liquid. So the NPC is really a piece of managing the key, but that wasn't enough for us to really improve our service levels like we did over the past year. We also had to do some other improvements to our infrastructure, including managing using smart contracts to move assets from one wallet address to another in a cryptographically secure manner. We developed algorithms to evaluate withdrawals. So we would look at a client's withdrawal because like I said, we have hundreds of thousands of clients and they're active 24 hours a day. So we needed to replace people's manual review of transactions and replace it by a rules-based evaluation system that really took their collective experience of evaluating withdrawals and making a decision whether it's even ready to go to our signing framework to begin with. And then we've also implemented bots. So when transactions have passed our initial risk controls, we then allow bots to actually sign the transactions with no people involved if they're below a certain threshold. This is how we achieved 24/7, 365 service levels. So, we're really proud of what we did to embrace NPC technology. I see that this is a trend that's going to increase. I hope it'll increase here in Japan, globally. But we also think it's a framework for offering new services that are blockchain-based with digital assets. So we're now currently building our liquid custody solution, where we will offer pure custody solutions to clients, even clients that aren't necessarily trading on a liquid exchange. And we will roll this out with some pretty interesting features from day one. So number one, a lot of the people in the industry that we're used to working with, they're high frequency traders and hedge funds. So they'll be able to submit their withdrawal request via an API. Maybe they're doing some sort of machine-based trading and they need to rebalance their portfolios. So the risk forms, the risk policy will still be in place, but they'll be able to make the request via API. We'll have integration with decentralized finance applications that will allow our clients to earn a yield on the assets that they're custodying with us. And we'll also extend credit to customers that are using us as a custody agent. We'll also give them credit fully on our exchange without any risk of loss of funds from exchange activities. And as we expand out into our roadmap, we're adding in new features and services familiar with some of the more traditional custody providers. So one of the killer apps that we're working on right now with our blockchain engineering team is really trying to, like I said, blockchain is a new way of decentralized managing the finance. And so we're integrating our custody solution with something called the DAI savings rate. Just want to ask a quick question. How many people here know what DAI is? See, raise your hands. Okay, that's pretty good. So DAI is it's an ERC20 token, And DAI are created when people take one cryptographic asset, in this case Ethereum, and they pledge it as collateral. And they have to pledge 150% of the collateral. And then what they get out is a DAI token that's worth always a stable coin as $1. And this is sort of a decentralized financial ecosystem that has evolved with the number of DAI that's been issued has been increasing month over month consistently. And the project team that's created DAI is something called MakerDAO. And late last year in November, they introduced something called the DSR, which is the DAI savings rate. And the DAI savings rate allows people to send their DAI to a smart contract and then start getting a yield from the asset that they sent to the smart contract. Currently, the DSR is returning a yield of 7.75%. The interest is actually accumulated on a per second basis, and it's completely governed by a smart contract, meaning once the DAI is sent to the smart contract, it can only be sent back to the original wallet address from which it was sent. So it's a complete security model where it's trustless and riskless that the DAI gets lost and set someplace else. So we're also looking at other options that we're going to be integrating to the custody solution, Cosmos, Tezos, and other staking protocols that we think is going to be really helpful to build a decentralized financial system. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Seth. Wasn't that amazing? Let's give him another round of applause. All right, I think there was some, change it up a little bit. I think there were some questions that we had for Seth and Dr. Lindell. I want to be able to use a little bit of time to be able to get those questions before we move into the panel, since it seems like everyone wants to jump on these two wonderful gentlemen. But let me just throw it out to the audience. Would you like to get the questions answered, or would you like to move to the panel? Questions, let's get some questions. Dr. Lindell, please come closer so you can be on TV. Seth, why don't you come in a little bit closer so that the internet audience can see you. A little bit closer.
Michael Reeves from Clear Markets. Hi. So with the MPC model, does the private key ever exist in its entirety in one place? And what happens to it after that?
The answer is no, it does not. It's never combined in any place at any time. I know it sounds like magic, but it's not. It's science. You're able to carry out local operations and interact and get the final result without ever bringing it together. So there isn't that split second of risk that comes to mind. You actually have to breach all of them.
Even when it's originally created?
Even during creation, you can also, there's also an NPC protocol to generate the key.
Thank you very much. Please, for the record, please introduce who you are, the name of the firm you represent, and then your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm Jörg from Sato law firm specializing in blockchain. So I've been in touch with your team last year, last year, a very good team, and I was wondering about the same question too. So if you take a look at your solution, you know, here on the Japanese market there will be a difference between hot wallets and cold wallets in the future. So if you take a look at your MPC solution, would you put it in more in the hot wallet category or in a cold wallet category, or is it something completely different we have to tell the regulator about? Thank you very much.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's not a cold and it's not a hot, or depends how you define, right? Depends how you define it. It provides different capabilities, and I think, yes, we do need to work with the regulators. It's possible to, as I mentioned, regulators who say, no, we must have cold, and it's possible to have one piece which we call the series NPC, and that way you can transition as well. But there are some people who use the term warm wallet, which I guess you could talk about something that's connected but requires human approval that's cryptographically enforced. Maybe we could define it that way, but indeed it's a different animal.
Okay, one more question before we move to the panel. Way in the back. Again, introduce yourself, the name of the firm, and your question.
Thank you. Jeff Wentworth from Curve really groundbreaking technology. Thanks for taking us through that, both Seth and Professor Lindell. The question is, you mentioned in the presentation, Professor Lindell, that the keys need to be compromised simultaneously. I presume that means within a refresh period of the keys. And so, just curious, what's the typical refresh period that you recommend for your customers? And then, how does that work if you've got a completely offline key? So one of the key elements is, let's say, an HSM in a vault, and does that need to come back into the mix to be able to refresh the keys?
Oh, we're getting really technical, great. So there are different types of refresh, but generally you can define it to whatever you want the default to be. Or the default is 1 hour, for example, in assistance. So you can define it to be anything that you want. You don't have to refresh all the pieces. So you can, the way that you can do the refresh is that some pieces are not refreshed while others are, and that enables you to leave the offline piece without a refresh because that's by definition not possible, while the others are refreshed. So you can solve it in that way. There was one more question.
Is there one question in the back? Try to get that mic.
プレゼンツから来ました澤田と言います。オフラインパーティーとオンラインパーティーはどうやって情報をやり取りしますか。MPC アルゴリズムは多くのラウンドを必要とすることが多いと思うんですけど、それをオフラインのパーティーっていうのは実用的だと思います。
So yeah, were you asking whether fully homomorphic encryption can be used for this? Was that your question? There are other technologies. Fully homomorphic encryption and additively homomorphic encryption are tools that can be used, but the main difference is that that doesn't require interaction. In the context of what we're doing here, interaction is not a problem. In fact, it's a good thing. MPC is orders of magnitude faster than fully homomorphic encryption, a much more mature technology based on more standard assumptions. So I believe that it's a better technology now. In a decade or 2 decades, we'll see, but we have a 25-year lead on them, so it's much more mature right now. I hope I answered the question.
So I think the question is a little bit different, but I want to be able to be cognizant of time because we do have a panel. We have some panelists. So let's take that question offline during the networking. I think we need to give. I think your question is a little bit different than what Professor Lindell has provided. But let's welcome the panelists up to the stage and begin our panel. So Irfan and Thomas, please come on board. And also, we're also going to get the simultaneous translation devices ready as well. So give us a second. Roger, can we change the light set? I'm going to try to stand here on the sides, so you ready? Okay, let us get started. So thank you again, everybody. We have those are great presentations. And we're really happy to have you here. This now begins our panel discussion. So before we begin any further, I would like to have each of the panelists provide a brief introduction for yourself and the firm you will represent to the audience. I know that there are some people who came in a little bit late, so for the benefit of them, please provide a little bit about your firm as well. So with that, I will start with Irfan, who flew in all the way from Singapore to join us today.
Thank you very much. Enjoying the change of the weather. My name is Irfan Ahmad. I represent State Street Bank and Trust. I'm a recent transplantee from London to Singapore, where my team is looking at specifically new technologies and how they are disrupting our traditional business model with a specific focus on digital assets.
Thanks. I'm Thomas Glucksmann. I work for Merkle Science. We're a Singapore-based company that focuses on blockchain monitoring solutions. So we work with financial institutions and crypto exchanges, and also with government agencies like law enforcement to try and help them detect and prevent illegal use of cryptocurrencies. I'm based here in Tokyo, even though we're headquartered in Singapore. I've actually been working in the crypto asset space since 2012. So I have quite a unique perspective on how the industry has changed since then.
I'm Yehuda Lindell, CEO and co-founder of Unbound Tech. We provide solutions for cryptographic key protection and management for enterprise security as well as cryptocurrency applications. I'm a cryptographer by trade, an academic at Ahmad, and I crossed the dark side into business recently to become CEO.
I'm Seth, Melamed, I'm CEO of Liquid. Liquid is a cryptocurrency exchange. We offer spot, derivatives, to custody, and we also are rolling out some B2B services for cryptocurrency exchange.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. So I'll start with the first question. I'll start with Irfan. The question is why has safe custody, crypto custody, been such an issue historically? I'd love to get all of you, the panelists' perspective on that, based on your career and firms you represent. And we'll start with Irfan first.
So I guess we'll talk from a traditional custodian perspective, our outlook and our view on digital custody. So I guess it comes with clause of definition around what we mean by digital custody. When we've been speaking with regulators around the world, their view and their stance around digital custody and their definitions, they all tend to differ in many different ways, whether it be the type of operations that are required to be able to perform custody within their jurisdiction, or the way in which the technology that needs to be implemented in order to be able to provide a robust institutional custody solution in the market. I guess from our stance and our kind of history within traditional custody, it's been a relatively well-defined and well understood operation, and therefore it's something that for I guess a relatively new space within the asset class, which is largely very young. It's very difficult to actually provide something that's a universal or homogeneous definition in this area. So that's something that we're all kind of working with the industry, from traditional partners to new fintech partners, to understand how we approach this space, and we look to speak common language before we then come up with a universal regulation or an outlook.
Yeah, I think regulation aside, I think one of the key challenges has been how the businesses themselves has tried to carry out custody operationally. I mean, back in the day there was no even hardware wallets. People would print out their private keys on pieces of paper. I have plenty of paper wallets still at home. I even printed out as a seed key on a titanium wallet, and I have that in a safe deposit box in 2 different banks. So that gives you an idea of the kinds of solutions that used to exist. Now, as plenty of hacks have taken place of various different kinds of businesses, I've worked at 2 exchanges. Both of those exchanges have been hacked. It's 2 for 2. I believe even the exchanges that are operated by, let's say, more professional players are still going to be vulnerable to these kind of issues, regardless of what kind of solutions they have in place. But I'd say that adopting solutions like MPC or more approaches, more paranoid ways of operating, the business operationally, and then applying that to custody is the only way that the industry will be able to move forward. Otherwise, you're still going to have more cases like we saw back in 2013, 2014, and cases that you still see this year, with various different hacks taking place here in Japan, in Korea, and all around the world. So I definitely think that, regulation aside, companies really need to get their act together across all sides of the business, not just from security, but it starts from every member of the organization to the security background.
Coming back to the historical aspect, I think it's just a completely different animal. That's also the way I started my presentation. The threats are very different. We can try and look for analogs and we don't find them. You used to have to turn up to a bank to rob it. Now you can rob a bank from some country very, very far away. We used to talk about cybersecurity and threats, but it's something very secondary. I steal information, I steal data, and that value is nowhere near the same here. The value is huge. The rewards are immediate, they're irreversible. I can be remote. The incentives are just so high that getting it right against such a threat is very, very difficult, and it takes time to learn. And I think that, it does take time, and we just we have to continue pushing forward. And I think we've already learned quite quickly, it's still not quick enough, that being sort of laid back about it is just a really, really bad idea.
Thank you. So moving on to the next question, I'm going to try to preface this a little bit. So it's been 10 years since the birth of Bitcoin, and during that time, the digital currency's value has fluctuated wildly. I think with a leading world crypto exchange, no name here, victim to a $41 million US Bitcoin hack, security remains front and center across both customers and media alike. Now there are more than 2,000 cryptocurrencies, and they have drawn acclaim and as a next generation payment solution, thanks to the conveniences they offer, like remitting money across national borders without having to go through banks. But that ease of use means that they could be used for illegal transactions and money laundering. So my question to the panel is, how is the JFSA or global regulation in general attempting to enforce the right kind of credibility and safety into this space, both on the retail and also on the institutional side? I'll start with Seth.
It's a very difficult question. So, like I mentioned, I spent a long time in banking, and one of the principles around payments is something called the funds travel rule, which, bear with me, it simply means that when one financial institution transmits value to another, they need to include some identifying information about the remitting party, so that there's sort of a trail of evidence around when you're sending euros from one person to another, that the bank that's transmitting those euros needs to include who is the sender, basically. And the problem with blockchain is, what do you have? You don't have names, you have addresses. That's a randomized string of characters and numbers. And so it's a real challenge, and I'll be honest, I don't have the answers about how blockchain technology works with regulations that were designed for frameworks that simply don't fit with today's technology. I think what we'll see in the short run is what we've been seeing, which is a lot of scrutiny placed on, I would say, the gatekeepers, the exchanges, the wallet providers, making sure that at least the gatekeepers are doing the best that they can to know their clients, practice good AML policies to the extent that they can. But maybe at some point there'll be new blockchain technologies that will better able to track the provenance of who the sender is. But on the other hand, the white paper says about Bitcoin that it's meant to be anonymous, or at least semi-anonymous. So I don't really know how it's going to play out, but I'm excited to see how things go.
I'll defer to the others for the regulatory aspect, because I'm a cryptographer. But I'll give a perspective. In the 80s, when Shao and others played around with the ideas of digital cash, the whole aim of what was supposed to be indeed decentralized, indeed anonymous, or at least partially, it's not really today, but you have some coins which are better at that. It's supposed to be something which is anarchic. These are the type of people, those people, the type of people who are looking at it. That's what they're aiming for, and the reality is that once it's succeeded, we realize that it can't actually work that way. And so now we indeed have that gap, and we have to bridge that gap because for the currency to be useful, we do need to have trust in the currency and trust in what's, and the regulators are doing that, but the technology indeed doesn't suit it.
Yeah, so I see three main challenges. I'll go through them pretty quickly in the interest of time. So the first is that you have the travel rule now being imposed in the cryptocurrency industry. The main issue around this is that the Financial Action Task Force wants their member countries to enforce that exchanges operating in their jurisdictions make sure that they are ensuring that this travel rule comes into effect this June. Now the thing is, there's no technical protocol in place for exchanges to share this information efficiently. This is the number one issue. It's a big challenge, and regulators and exchanges are struggling with this at the moment. The second point is around adapting to new technologies. So you have innovations such as the Lightning Network, which was supposed to be one of the big ways that Bitcoin and other standards, let's say proof of work, cryptocurrency-based technologies were supposed to kind of leapfrog a lot of the other new cryptocurrencies coming into the fore in terms of convenience, of speed and other things. But the fact is, with Lightning Network, transactions are anonymous if the transactions are taking place in the payment channel. Now, no exchange, no regulator has offered a clear solution to address this issue. So until that's solved, one of the main innovations in Bitcoin technology, at least, cannot really become mainstream because no exchange can support it. And then finally, one of the challenges that you have is that criminals are becoming increasingly sophisticated, so regardless of what rules you have in place, there'll be always ways to game the system. We see this today. Exchange has strict KYC, so what do the criminals do? They pay someone with a perfect record with no criminal activity to sign up for the exchange for them. Okay, let's say now their wallets are being monitored. You know, we provide a blockchain monitoring service. What do the criminals do? Again, they use a so-called clean wallet and conduct activities using clean wallets. There are many ways to game all the rules and systems in place, so both regulators and exchanges need to understand this changes in activity. So it's going to be you know, a tough cat and mouse game.
So I'm not 100% sure how I can add on to all of those very valid points that have been made previously by my co-panelists. But again, the view that we can espouse from being a global custodian working in traditional markets is that we have to realise that the marketplace is, or rather digital assets as a whole, have been around for 10 years, and there's a lot of growing up that we need to do in terms of understanding how these assets work, the technologies that support them, the regulations that are not homogeneous right now, as well as the security and technology that's being developed to ensure that institutional investors get confident enough to be able to invest in multiple jurisdictions as opposed to just focusing on one. More sophisticated asset management clients are looking to see if they might be able to take advantage of this type of asset class across multiple jurisdictions as opposed to focusing on one particular area. And that's something that we have a specialism in within the traditional market, but that doesn't really translate across as it currently stands in terms of the types of regulations that are coming up. And the regulators in different jurisdictions and their treatment, it still remains out for the jury to decide. But from what I can tell, there's been important steps on that journey being made, and incrementally we'll get there. But I'm actually hopeful. I can't speak for the rest of the panelists, but 2020 we hope will be a very important year for regulations to really solidify, basically create clarity for institutions to get involved.
We have one question for Thomas. So, Thomas, could you share some of your professional experiences working at two hacked exchanges, Mt. Gox and Gatecoin, and how that has shaped your mental model on why the better custody infrastructure should be the core focus of the industry? We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so first of all, I think it's kind of obvious as to why we need better custody and security technology for this ecosystem. I won't comment specifically on the why and the what and the how and the who. Mt. Gox and Gatecoin. But what I will say is that you know, I actually started my my career in the industry at Mt. Gox, and so those experiences, both, you know, dealing with that issue, but dealing with a lot of the other issues such as difficulty of maintaining bank accounts, regulatory uncertainty, that has actually stayed the same, you know, since 2013 up until the present day. So a lot of those challenges still remain, whereas, as Professor Lindell said, the sophistication of criminals is increasing day by day. The types of attacks that exist, I would say that if you're operating an exchange, it's almost like operating the Death Star, for those of you who are familiar with the Star Wars movies. The reason being is that, you know, you can have this giant fortress battle station and, you know, all these TIE fighters and defenses and whatever and shields and everything else, but you'll still have the, you know, the port where Luke Skywalker can dump his missile and blow up the Death Star. So there's always going to be vulnerabilities for whatever solution you have in place. So I think that you need to have this kind of mentality. I also think you need to be extra paranoid with everything when it comes to hiring, when it comes to, you know, who you have answering customer support, even these little steps that, you know, regardless of what solution you have in place, makes a big difference on the organization. You know, also from a personal perspective, if anybody ever says, oh, you know, we have a crisis, I say, okay, did you lose $500 million? No, okay, it's not a crisis. So I think putting things in perspective with those kind of issues is very important, but I definitely think that long term, anybody that wants to operate any type of crypto business, whether it's an exchange, a custody, a prop trading firm, whatever it is, security needs to be the #1 priority. Everything else, liquidity, volume, regulation, whatever, that is obviously irrelevant, because at the end of the day, if there are, you know, your assets are stolen, your assets are stolen. And even though companies, you know, such as, you know, Merkle exist to help trace where these funds are going, the fact is smart criminals will be able to get away with it. We still haven't brought a lot of the hackers to justice that were involved in Docs and Gatecoin and other major hacks that have happened several years. It's unlikely we're going to bring them to justice anytime soon. So if we can prevent them from, you know, taking their criminal activities to the forefront, then I think that's the priority.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'd like to respectfully disagree, Thomas.
Oh, we have a debate.
Yeah. Look, of course, the bad guys are getting smarter and they're evolving, but we also have people like Professor Lindell, who dedicated the past 20 years of his life to improving the frameworks for managing digital assets. You mentioned one point I think it's really important to bring out. You said, well, we still haven't caught some of those hackers that hack some of those exchanges, and until you have a great understanding of what happened, it's going to be difficult to install confidence. To bring back to MPC technology for just a minute, one of the great values of MPC versus sort of traditional means of managing private keys is that it actually creates an audit log of which key share was used in the signing of the transaction. So if you go back, you look at a lot of those hacks that happened last year in Mt. Gox backwards, sometimes they didn't arrest the people because they simply didn't know who was the one actioning the key. But in an MPC framework, there's a clear log where we can see which of the key shares was active in the signing of the transaction. So in a sense, it creates a digital fingerprint for the bad guy that was involved. And I would hope some sort of deterrence for people to want to kind of make off with the funds. I'm looking at my team right now, making sure they're not thinking about trying to steal from us. But yeah, so I think, of course, the bad guys are always going to be out there, but there's also you know, a tremendous amount of investment going on in the space from security perspective, from a utility perspective, and you know, I for one am a believer in the transformative capability of blockchain, and I have no doubt that it's going to pick up over time.
Thank you, Seth.
I just want to add, I don't think there's any disagreement. I think that's exactly what was said, but I do want to say that, you know, I might surprise you, but MPC is also not a 100% solution. There is no 100% security. I think that, yeah, security is our #1 priority, and it's not a checkbox anymore. It's not saying, yes, I've done MPC, and if someone steals my user data, okay, it's not the end of the world. This is the actual funds that runs the business. So it has to be number one, and there are better solutions, but nothing is 100%, and we have to be really, really careful.
Thank you, Professor Lindell. I think that's a great segue to the next question, which maybe I'll start off with Irfan. Will existing custodial solutions be able to withstand the next generation of regulation? How do you feel about that? Any thoughts?
So let me just define, we're talking about traditional digital custody solutions as opposed to traditional solutions. How many times can you fit traditional into a sentence? So again, I think that as the technology improves and as regulation becomes fine-tuned, I think that it'll ask more pertinent questions of operators within this digital asset domain. And as Thomas and Professor Lindell have kind of touched on, the nefarious actors within this space will keep on pushing regulators to ensure that they are providing more robust technological solutions, and maybe not even technological, but more just logical solutions for these actors to be less effective in, say, for instance, their desire to access wallets or the storage or custody solutions where some of these actors do sit. So I think it's not there's absolutely going to be more regulatory rigor. I think that what we're probably going to see is that jurisdictions such as Japan are taking more pragmatic approaches in regards to the way in which they regulate digital assets and operators of digital assets, such as exchanges, and more kind of established jurisdictions such as the SEC. In the US have already stated that they need to look towards the East for guidance on how they actually look to approach digital assets as a whole. Now, that's not looking specifically at digital asset custodianship, but that's looking at how they look at a licensing framework, how they look at everything in terms of designing an effective ecosystem that will be viable for institutional investors to actually come in. So again, that's purely from my vantage point working within the traditional space, but that's where we see the real driver for regulation change, and of course they'll keep on pushing exchanges, and actually exchanges in turn are actually working with regulators to inform them as to where there might be soft points in the armour that they need to kind of be a little bit more cognizant of. And I'm sure that Professor Lindell will lend his expertise in those conversations as we go forward.
Thank you very much. I think that's a great segue to a question for Seth, which is how are exchanges adapting to the evolving regulatory environment, and what do you believe successful exchanges need to do to survive and thrive?
Oh, great question. So, as I look across the landscape in our industry, particularly here in Asia, you see more and more. You see really two different approaches developing. So one is an exchange will start asking for KYC information, even though they've been operating for many years without doing so. That's sort of one approach. But another approach is, unfortunately, you see certain entities in our industry trying to find friendly jurisdictions that will allow them to operate without scrutiny. So I think there's a long way to go. I think that more common sense approach needs to be thought out, with all of the players in the ecosystem. You can't necessarily just lift and shift regulations that have been applied to fiat businesses and just automatically stick them into a blockchain-based business and expect it to work and expect the users to be okay with it, but there's definitely middle ground to be found, and my personal approach is always to work with regulators, not run away from them, and I think that's our approach here at Liquid. So we'll see.
Thank you very much. One final question for all the panelists. The question is, where do you think we will be in the next 3 to 5 years with all the technology, technology emerging, tokenization, blockchains? You know, how do you see the market going forward? I guess I'll start with Seth, and then we can and roll.
You know, for blockchain to really take off, I think two key points. One we've talked about here is better custodial solutions, but another part I don't think we've touched on is utility, making it easier for people to use. Thomas talked about how at some point he had paper wallets, so to move crypto, he actually had to take out a piece of paper and manually key them into his computer to effect the transaction. But if I think about my daughter, I think that the technology that I see being developed everywhere and the amount of investments going on in the space, she may never actually be used cash and coins and have a coin dish like we have at home. So what I see happening is a lot more utility and investment to just make it a more seamless piece of people's lives. And if we think about it in Japan, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar, that the government is actually supporting this as well. So digital cash payments, there's actually, in Japan, if you pay with cashless means, you get a 5% discount, I think, from October of this year, which is pretty interesting. And I would just leave it with one anecdote. So a few weeks ago, I went to see the movies with my wife, and we went to the Dunkin' Donuts to get a coffee, because I usually can't stay awake at those things. And at the Dunkin' Donuts, they actually don't accept Visa and MasterCard, right? They only accept KPay, Alipay, basically digital cash. And so you see the rate of change is actually increasing. It probably took how many hundreds of years for Visa, MasterCard to replace cash. But now you see digital payments disrupting Visa and MasterCard. And so I think it's only inevitable before, you know, it's not Alipay and PayPay and all that kind of stuff, but it'll be real crypto that merchants will accept. As long as the investment to make it easier and faster for people to use keeps it at pace, we're going to have a much more blockchain-centered world.
I think when you say 3 to 4 years, my answer has to be I have no idea, because it's moving so fast, so who knows. I can say that I'm very happy to see a lot of the hype falling away. A lot of the solutions that provide no solution or are worthless are falling away. We see a lot more of real interest in building real value and institutional players coming into the space. So that's a positive sign, but where it will go, no idea.
It's three quick trends I expect. Mass consolidation of the exchange market. We have more than 200 or almost 300 spot exchanges. There's no way you can have that many number of exchanges in a few years, given most of them have fake volumes anyway. The second trend is there's going to be a heated war of the stable coins. You're going to have national governments and major companies. You already have the People's Bank of China with their digital currency, Bank of Japan. All the central banks are going to be fighting with each other with their stable coins. And then the big companies are going to do the same. And then the third trend is, you know, you're going to have companies that try and experiment with the so-called stable security token market. I'm quite skeptical of security tokens, but I think there'll be an experiment, it's going to fail, and then we're going to move on. So those are the three trends I expect.
So without dusting off my crystal ball, so in terms of the security tokens element that you kind of spoke about, I'll humbly disagree. We see a trend amongst our institutional investors that is actually the entry points for institutions to actually come into the digital asset space. Cryptocurrencies, whilst they are a novel idea, they are a stepping stone into the tokenized or cryptographic space, as far as our client base tend to think. So from that perspective, I see that is a trend in terms of tokenizing traditional assets. It may be that we start off in, say for instance, public equity, and then move into slightly more illiquid assets in order to be able to unlock more value from those areas, and enable more distribution of those types of assets in the future. Again, a little foggy, the crystal ball, so you'll have to bear with me. The other piece that I think will happen is I think that there will be a combination of traditional and non-traditional partnerships that will form globally, and I think that big tech firms will also play an incredibly important role in shaping and forming in this space. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a relatively large platform player come in and take advantage of the distribution network that they already have within the space. I think I'll just say that those two. I don't want to share too much.
We'll share more after drinks. So, are there any? Thank you all to all our panelists. Are there any questions from the audience to our illustrious panelists? Any questions? Oh, I see a question from somebody at Liquid. Please state your name. What do you do?
Hello, my name is Sergey. I'm working with Liquid. Backend engineer. My question is, don't you think that as long as government don't support the crypto, it won't succeed? Everybody tends to make a crypto as a payment network, that everybody can verify everything is encrypted and can be rolled back. But there is a general regulatory tries to regulate but don't tries to contribute. I mean, if everything is one stable coin, assuming Bitcoin, then as long as the payment is anonymous, it can be accepted. And in my hand, I mean, as long as government don't accept it, there will be the money laundering and blah. I mean, terrorists and bad guys will get your money even before the blockchain existed.
Is there any comment from the panelists to our question?
So, I don't think I disagree with you. That won't be the end of the answer. But in terms of governments, or should we say central banks, being more open to the idea of digital assets as a whole. There was a recent survey by the Bank of International Settlements which surveyed central banks to see what their interest was in terms of central bank digital currencies. And the results were that at least 70% of central banks were either in active projects or at least thinking about using central bank digital currencies as a way to be able to modernize their RTGS systems, look forward and future-proof their economies. And I think the question around cryptos and the regulated status of cryptos is hotly up for debate. In the US, Bitcoin and Ether are commodities, I believe. I think they haven't got the CFTC. And I can't really see that happening for the 2,000 plus coins that are currently circulating in the market. But you're right. I think in terms of governments accepting these types of crypto assets, it's imperative. But again, I must say that in real terms, there's only been proper development in the last 5, maybe 6 years. It's still a very young space. It needs time. In the wholesale markets, at least, we're now getting to the point where there are a few interested parties that are looking to take advantage of the return profile of these types of assets. But yeah, I don't think we'll get too many arguments from the rest of the panelists on your views there.
Okay, we have a question in the back. Please state your name, the firm, and also your question. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Krill. I'm a trader. Question: if you're in exchange with some older security scheme like HSM or multi-sig, what are the time, operational, and infrastructure costs associated to moving to new security model like MVC?
Who wants to take that question?
I'll answer that in a slightly different way. Has anybody ever been to Vietnam? So the first time I went to Vietnam was probably around maybe 2014 when actually Liquid was getting started. And what struck me right away was the prevalence of mobile phones, right? So Vietnam actually kind of went from telegrams over wires directly into mobile phones, and what they never developed was landline phone systems, right? So they were able to skip a generation of technology and really use a more advanced means of communication, and at some point the adoption rate of cell phones in Vietnam was greater than it was in the United States. So if I think about exchanges, we had sort of a similar situation here at Liquid. You guys saw the charts where we were processing withdrawals on mostly homegrown, outdated technology, taking us 11 hours, and we were able to sort of skip a generation of HSMs and go into MPC. I would say that the better capitalized exchanges out there will have the resources to make that transition. As Thomas had mentioned, there's something like 503 spot exchanges out there today. I don't think a lot of them are going to make that leap. They're not going to make it over the to the next steps. But it really, I think inherent in your question is also that all users or traders on exchanges need to really understand who they're working with, who are the people behind the exchange, the technology that they're using, and because it can make a big difference between getting your assets out safely or ending up like creditors from outbox.
Are there any more questions? State your name, firm, and your question.
My name is Robert. I work for Keiko. We're a market provider. I have a question about, basically two questions on the regulation. I don't remember who was that mentioned that they think that the West should look more to the East, and I'm just curious, like, what is the more compelling thing with, let's say, how the Japanese regulators have been looking at crypto versus the SEC. I have a very limited understanding of Japan, but it seems like there's a whitelist of tokens and no issues, and they can arbitrarily choose them because they were popular, and no licenses have been issued since the coin check hack because everybody's really afraid we have to wait until everybody's calmed down, like a little bit in a couple of years. And then a little bit related to like what are the real challenges that exchanges are facing when it comes to working with regulators. Like it seems like practically we have the zero knowledge proofs and like the theory is already solved on like how to prove things without disclosing information, and it's just a matter of practically employing protocols that the regulators are able to work with. So it's just a matter of like engineering and education.
Who wants to decompose that question? Deconstruct, excuse me.
So I'll address the second part first. In terms of working with regulators, I think some regulators are more proactive and have a better understanding of the ecosystem in certain jurisdictions than others. With your specific point about zero knowledge proofs, we know for a fact that a lot of regulators aren't very familiar with the concept, or even if they are, they're still quite paranoid about it because they still believe that there is ways that this can be exploited, for greater anonymity, etc. That's why here in Japan there is a decision that exchanges cannot list privacy coins, although we do know that there are new privacy coins and new privacy-based protocols like Wimble that are in development. For example, there's a project actually headquartered in Israel called Beam, where they have an auditability function, and that's actually designed so that regulators can become more comfortable with the ideas of zero-knowledge proofs when it comes to cryptocurrency transactions. To the point about looking to the East for inspiration, etc. I personally don't 100% agree with that idea. I feel that yes, of course, Japan has very strict regulation, and but at the same time, I feel that the purpose of the original regulation was to prevent another Mt. Gox. But the reality is, you had very large exchange hacks that took place after Mt. Gox. So I'm not saying that the regulation failed, but what was the purpose of that initial regulation? If it was to prevent another Mt. Gox, then that initial regulation is a failure in my opinion. But of course now the standards that you have in place are very, very, very strict. I mean, try opening an exchange in Japan now. It's very tough. It's nearly impossible. So I think that this is, you know, Japan now has a very, very strict line, and I wouldn't want to operate an exchange now because of the standards are so strict. So I think for that standards, globally, it's probably #1 in terms of the strictness. However, I would say compared to other jurisdictions like Singapore, where Merkle Science is headquartered, the MAS has a very, very forward-looking perspective and very dynamic perspective. Now in Europe, the FSA, and even in the EU, you have directives which are creating a lot of specific guidelines. And if you look at market trends in general, Asia was always where you had a lot of market activity, and then the regulation came afterwards. Whereas Europe was always waiting for the regulation. Now that you have the regulation in place, we expect a lot of market activity to really kick off. So I think that binary statement is not 100% accurate, but yes, there are different ways that regulators can learn from each other, I guess.
We have time for one more question before we wrap up. His name, firm, and question. Thank you.
My name is Morioka from IBM, and this is a kind of technical question. So I think I understand that the MPC is a wonderful technology, but given the fact that there is no perfect technology, what kind of additional things could make the MPC more stronger?
Great question.
I'm a strong believer in defense in depth. You always have to think about multiple layers of security. MPC, the advantage of MPC is it gives you a platform that's very flexible. As I mentioned, with our solution in particular, it's possible to have a cold piece as well. We're actually discussing with IBM integration with the mainframe Z and the secure enclave in that. We're looking at running the full MPC inside SGX. SGX is leaky, but again, as a secondary measure, these are things that add layers of security. It has also how you deploy it, so you should be deploying over different in different environments. Seth mentioned that they have in different clouds. If you have on-prem and in different clouds, you force the attacker to breach multiple completely different environments simultaneously, almost simultaneously. That makes it very difficult. So yes, you certainly shouldn't say, oh, I have MPC and check the box. That's not the type of solution. It's something that's flexible enough for you to do rigorous threat analysis, combine it with other methods, and get something which is hopefully good enough. But it's a scary world. I really don't envy any CISO of an exchange.
Thank you very much. This concludes our panel and our event. Again, thank you everybody for taking time out of your busy day to come to our office to learn more. We have drinks and refreshments in the back. Please feel free to ask more questions to our illustrious panelists, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future. Thank you again for your time.